So, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to come talk to me about your new book.
Thank you, Jess. It's very exciting to be with you. Thank you.
I guess you want to start with the story of why well, why don't you tell us about the book, the basic topic, but then why did you write it? Like, what drove you to this?
So the book is the book is covers quite a large section of what I felt was missing in the development of our trajectory from boyhood, adolescence to manhood, and it's specifically around the way that our reproductive biological intelligence fashions us in ways that have been caricatured historically and transculturally. But the best that we've been able to do as a species is talk about the word hardwired. And we haven't really looked underneath the bonnet, as they say in England. Um, we haven't really looked into the engine room of what it is and how it affects us. And there are a couple of reasons for that, which possibly we can talk about later. But I was particularly fortunate to have um, a few Goldilocks things happen for me. First of all, I grew up in a family where my dad was a gynecologist, obstetrician. I discovered at the age of 11 that he was also a sex therapist. So I started my sex therapy education at the age of 11.
Oh,
I
wow.
went
Okay.
into, I found his books, I found
Yeah,
Forum magazine.
actually, thinking back, I probably could say the same thing. So, yeah.
There you go. So I found Forum magazine, which you'll remember, and Forum had a lot of great questions at the back of the book and answers. And I became very interested in the power of this drive, which seemed to have a laser sharp vector towards sex for us boys, without exception. The second thing I became interested in as I got a little bit older and got into relationships with women was the great divide, what appeared to be the great divide. So heterosexual relationships became interesting for me. And what I discovered later on, the suffering that happens through a lot of misunderstanding in heterosexual relationships. And there's a wonderful book called The Tragedy of Heterosexuality, which I can also recommend to your listeners. So many years later, on returning to South Africa, I was very privileged to be involved in a lot of men's consciousness work and had opportunity to co-lead tens of workshops for thousands of men. Um, and I was able to confirm my own experience living in a man's body, my friend's experience, but then I started to hear story after story of the same thing. The headline was the hijacking of our executive functioning by the sex drive. And I went to look for books on explaining, like, well, who's describing, in detail this particular hijacking? Why does it happen? How does it happen? What's the mechanism of it? And lo and behold, actually, I found nothing. I
Hmm.
found that the majority of research was designated to perpetration, as well as should be, pathology, as well as should be, medicalization, and the asexual man. But on my bell curve, I was interested in what I call the men in the middle, the average guy for whom sex distraction from puberty up till old age, even,
Yeah.
um, is a significant part of our lives as men. And so I was then invited, I suppose, to do my own research. And my research started for my PhD in the the conundrum of puberty, is where
Mm.
I thought a lot of this hardwiring actually takes place. Of course, it starts 7 weeks in utero with the first testosterone tsunami, but the marriage of our emotions and our biological sexual hardwiring actually starts to take place at puberty. And so what came after that was a realization that I didn't just have a PhD, I had a book. And as often happens,
Right.
I had a book, and the book had to answer the following questions. Why the heck do we men um, focus on sex so much as a calling? I call it a calling,
Mm.
like a mission. And secondly, how is it so predictable? How is it that across cultures it can be caricatured And across history, it can be caricatured. There can be only one common thread in all of that, and that is the genetic makeup of the male biological structure. And then I had to have a win at the end of the book, and so the win had to be constructed from the beginning. And what I decided the win needed to be was I had to offer men tools of refinement and reflection throughout the book to be able to challenge this incredibly clever biological hardwiring. And that's really how the book came about. I'll say one or two last things. There's a lovely saying by Kingsley Amis, who's a British author, who realized at the age of 72 that his libido had dwindled. And he also realized that he said he had been chained to a madman for, 50 years or so, 55 years. And it's this kind of madness that's evoked through biology that the men in the workshop spoke about in terms of being hijacked. And the last thing I'll mention is a wonderful work by a woman called Dr. Kayla Osteroff, who is a neuropsychophysiologist. And she has delineated the menstrual cycle and its effect on women's emotions and behavior. And in a way, I suppose this book does the same thing regarding men. Of course, it's quite a different model, as it has to be, because
Right.
making an egg and sperm is quite different. So that's really the origins, I suppose, of the question that you're asking me.
I'm curious how the lack of this work that you've done before, this lack of understanding of it as a hardwired drive, has impacted men. And well, I guess everybody, but the caricature of it that we've had, or the misunderstanding, or the lack of context or full picture of it. What are the consequences of that?
Well, relief is one. I mean, you can imagine if you have an engine running in you. I always call puberty, it's like being gifted a sports car with a brick on the pedal. And you have to try and figure out. Now, the only parallel in some of the talks that I've given that I've been able to draw for women is when I asked them, have you had a craving in pregnancy? And of course, when I say, what happened to the craving? They'll say, well, in the third trimester kind of went away. And I say, well, that's kind of the speed and the intensity of the male sex drive. And we don't have a third trimester. Well, maybe it's latter life when testosterone goes down,
Right.
but there's still the interest. And it's often met with a great deal of disbelief. It's like, that is not possible. It's not possible that you can be that intensely obsessed with, compelled, But unfortunately, by biological meaning, it is possible. So I will say the first thing that happens for men is relief. The second thing that happens is that they're able to understand that living in a reproductive body, because it's not that clear that men live in a reproductive body. It's clear that women live in a reproductive body. There are breasts, there's pregnancy, there's nurturing of a child, there's a pram. But it's not that obvious that men live in a reproductive body. So it's like a whole new sense of ownership for men. And therefore, with the ownership comes a sense of responsibility. It's like, I'm living in this body that has got an intentionality to make sex very interesting for me. And the world, even though it might be quite neutral in some circumstances, just becomes damn interesting sexually. So there is a blurring of the line between our reality and our imagination and assumptions and expectations. Of course, for young boys, to have this information while going through puberty or in adolescence, it's a wonderful way to become immediately present to what's arising. For old men, it's really useful also because even though they don't have the actioning towards sex, their heads are turning a lot. And they can realize that head turning and that interest is really biologically inclined, and they can begin to pay attention to their spouse and get on with life in a particular way. So there are a lot of positives. I know that you've had Peggy Kleinplatz on your program as well, and she's I follow her dearly. It also brings men, and this is a thread that I have throughout the book, it brings men much more into the optimal space of sex and intimacy. And
Mm.
it does that because we know very well the side of sex that is entertainment. And so the contrast that I draw in the book, which men are very familiar with and can place themselves on that paradigm somewhere at the start of this journey, is how close to sex for entertainment are they? And then we are able to move in a reflective way into greater communication with their partner, certainly more vulnerability. Because if I know and I'm willing to communicate and share what's going on for my body and my distractions, it can be quite meaningful for my partner, and that of course builds a whole different kind of intimacy, and gets out of the romance industrial complex, which we might get a chance to talk about later.
I know you have so many terms to explore, but I think what I hear you saying is that this hardwired drive is going to get men into sex, but there's this opportunity to get more from it than just entertainment or
Exactly.
release or right. Yeah, because
There's,
I think what is it
yeah.
your subtitle hardwired by nature, evolving by choice, right? It's not like we're just living from this drive and not trying to do anything with it.
Exactly. Exactly. And to that point, it really has to be a focused point. It has to be like sitting down for a meditation or a yoga practice initially, because, biology is so brilliant. If you think of the systems of our body, maybe 12 systems, the cardiac, the respiratory, the lymphatic system, they all run on their own and they all communicate with each other. There is only one system in the body that needs desperately another body to fully realize its potential, and that is our reproductive system. And even though our reproductive system doesn't keep us alive, although it gives us quality of life, it is the only system that defines and allows for the perpetuation of our species. Without the reproductive system, we're a one generation species. So just like the other systems in the body, to my mind, our reproductive system, biological intelligence, doesn't leave much choice up to us. In other words, it slides right under the radar. And if you look at the statistics of abortions, for example, or if you look at the statistics of unplanned children, 40 to 60% of kids unplanned. Some years ago, the abortion rates were 50 million. That's the population of South Africa or Spain. It means that something's getting under the consciousness of a very smart species, and that's us. And to that degree, biology is able to blur our reality and our imagination, and to cause confusion around assumptions and expectations.
What do you think? I mean, you're talking about specifically heterosexual relationships. What do you think the female partners need to understand about this or change, expand their thinking or bring into the room?
I think it's really useful when female partners of men acquire a similar curiosity about the creaturehood of their bodies and share that. I mean, it might be premenstrual stress, for example. It might be menopause. My partner's going through menopause at the moment. And I think there is incredible value in sharing the experience of the physiological nature of the bodies that we live in, because there's no doubt that it impacts the way that we connect physically. It impacts the way that we connect emotionally, and it builds deeper intimacy. So, I mean, many women have read the book and they found it insightful and extremely useful, um, to explain their man to themselves, even if their man is not ready to explain himself to them. And it builds incredible compassion and understanding.
Yeah.
And that's really where I think, again, I'll use the term the romance industrial complex has missed the point somewhat, because if we move more to the idea that we are part of nature and that our biological workings are part of nature and that we're part of this reproductive biological intelligence. It's not a part of us. And there's a very nuanced difference between saying
Mm.
that, because we don't have a choice when we go into menopause. We don't have, well, we try and change things around a little bit, but there's a clock that ticks and it's more intelligent than us. And so bringing on board this conversation of natural intelligence expands the possibilities in our relationships to deeper compassion, deeper understanding, and it reduces the dark nature of entitlement as well,
Yeah.
which breaks a lot of couples to pieces.
I was going to ask that, but before I did, when I said this other question, well, it ties in. I've heard people say, and it could just be women. I mean, it's not just women, but women come to mind. All you think about is sex. And that's meant in a derogatory way. It's a
Yes,
dismissive, diminishing kind of
yes,
comment. Um,
yes.
but in some ways, I think you're saying that's kind of true, right? They are thinking about sex, but where's the thing women need to understand about that drive to not just be dismissive about it?
Well, I think just to reflect on your noticing of of the comments coming from women, I'll make I'll make one uh, discernment here. I think the heterosexual relationship is the most challenging relationship when we look at gay relationships, or lesbian relationships, and the reason is because we are trying to survive the honeymoon phase and trying to connect to a body that is physiologically absolutely other planetary and
Mm-hmm.
emotionally quite different as well. So, again, recognizing the challenges that we take on as heterosexual couples, again, brings another light of compassion and understanding and a lesser entitlement. Um, I think that what women would do well to know is that the the brilliance of our reproductive biological intelligence is as brilliant as the menstrual cycle. I mean, the
Mm.
menstrual cycle, you got four hormones that are orchestrated in such a way that an egg pops down into the fallopian tube, ready to grow into a human being with the help of a sperm. Well, the sperm has to get to the egg. And one of the challenges I think that biology had to um, face was, how do you get the sperm to the egg? And if you look at all of the caricatures of the heterosexual male, you have the answer of how you get the sperm to the egg,
Mm-hmm.
which means constant interest in sex. And these comments have been replicated and understood and found in the research. Roy Baumeister reviewed a whole lot of 156 studies and found, yes, there's much more frequent, more intense sexual desire from men. But how does it happen? And I'll just give you one idea. First of all, the preoptic area, the medium preoptic area in the brain, which is for sexual pursuit or mate pursuit, is 2.5 times bigger in a man. And
Mm.
that is why often when you speak to a man, he'll know 180 degrees if there's something interesting on either side. That's the first thing. The second thing is a term that I coined called fantasies algorithmic projection. At about the age of puberty, the brain is undergoing some changes. So many more neurons are coming. The axons of the neurons are becoming myelinated. So we go from a dial-up telephone to Starlink. And the last thing that happens is that everything that wasn't used gets pruned away at the
Mm.
age of 26. Now I'm going to tell you something that happens in parallel. We men start masturbating furiously because there's an urge that's only released through ejaculation. So we stimulate, we fantasize, that's visualization, and we ejaculate. If you have a systematic, ongoing, hundreds to thousands times episodes of those, you land up trying to coordinate your inner world with your outer world. what happens is that the neurons that have become mesmerized by sex during puberty remain.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll see a man of 50, 60, 70 showing the same enthusiasm for sex and sexual possibilities, as a 30-year-old. And that often confabulates women that I talk to who are like often going through menopause and definitely perhaps not interested in sex anymore. But this fantasy's algorithmic projection has us men hardwired to constantly think about sexual opportunity. The sperm has to get to the egg. To my mind, it's part of the brilliant design of making sure that the species carries on, like the heart keeps beating, the lungs keep breathing. Our reproductive biological intelligence seeks to ensure this next generation from happening. Unfortunately, there is a lot of misunderstanding that men have towards women's availability or interest in sex. And that's where the term that arises, toxic masculinity, and as I mentioned to you prior to the interview, I prefer the term intoxicated masculinity. We can talk about that if we have time.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, there is this great discrepancy, and I think women are often saying that more more as a pleading, like, isn't there anything else that
Yeah.
you might be interested in contextually about our relationship? So that's one of the challenges, of the heterosexual relationship. And of course, gay relationships don't necessarily have that, or there's less possibility that they
Right.
do have.
So let's talk a little bit about what at least could be perceived as the negative side of this, like entitlement or the things men might do uh, under this intoxication or this spell of this
Yeah,
drive to
yeah,
procreate, like cheating
yeah,
and rape and coercion. And I mean, there's so
yeah.
many things that can be done under the umbrella of that biological imperative.
Yes, there are. And first, I'll say I think that's part of the reason why this conversation hasn't found the light of day yet, is because people would see it as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually sat for a year thinking about, like, do I actually want to get into this conversation and take the beating I might take? But the point is, um, all of these actions that you're talking about are able to be let's say, negated through the conversation of understanding the settings, the base settings or the hard wirings of men. So people that are working with gender-based violence, for example, if they would acquiesce to introducing the men that they're working with to the notion that they're in a sports car with a brick on the pedal and they have the responsibility, it's not it may be natural what they're feeling, but it's not natural to act out what they're feeling. And so there's a lot of discernment that comes when men begin to understand that that they're operating, a heavy vehicle. Let's call it that. Um, I do think that the word that has emerged, toxic masculinity, I do think that it would be more useful for boys to hear a different word. And the word I've already mentioned is intoxicated masculinity. And I'll tell you why. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Ludwig Wittgenstein. Ludwig Wittgenstein was a philosopher and a mathematician who said that our experiences are determined by the words that we use.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you took the word awesome and you applied it to every magnificent moment, for a year, those moments would suddenly turn into rather mundane occurrences. And frankly, your memory of them would also be rather mundane. Um, the other thing is that a modern day mystic, Neil Kramer, said that we can only think with the words that we know, which is kind of obvious, but quite a brilliant thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a word about intoxicated masculinity. From some of what I've shared with you, we can see that men easily fall into that place of intoxicated entitlement through the median preoptic area, through fantasies, algorithmic projections, through actioning towards sex, through the misunderstandings. It's easy to come from that place and to do harm. Now, if you use the word intoxicated masculinity, you can understand that we're not only intoxicated by the system of our reproduction, um, but we're also intoxicated by what it can do for us as men. So when we use the word intoxicated masculinity, it gives an opportunity for a man to reflect that indeed he is driving this reproductive biological intelligence and that he has some responsibility. It's also useful for young boys not to hear the word toxic masculinity, because it's kind of a catch-22. It can be a catch-22 situation. And so their hands get tied behind their back. If they understand that they can get drunk by the system and in that drunkenness misbehave, I think that adds a Wittgensteinian approach to helping to fix this predicament that we have.
Yeah, it allows someone to realize they've got some choices and some power, right? If it's just toxic
Exactly.
and broken and bad, what am I supposed to do about it? But if it's
Spot on.
intoxicated, I can pay attention and be responsible.
Exactly.
So your car
Exactly.
metaphor is interesting too, because a sports car with a brick on the pedal, right? We can't
Yeah,
just drive down the highway wherever we want and cause carnage, right? We've got a responsibility to the other drivers on the road.
exactly. Exactly. Well said. And you asked the question earlier, what's the point of knowing what's under the bonnet here of the car, um, under the hood? One of the benefits of that is is being able to take the brick off the pedal, because then um, there's another saying, am I thinking sex or is sex thinking me? That's a moment of awareness that men come to in the therapy space with me, when unwanted thoughts, unwanted fantasies come into the mind. They can create a place of observation rather than feeling that it is them that's thinking that. Again, as you noticed with intoxicated masculinity, it it it's a very nuanced tweak of empowerment, but a very important one. So the man is either slipping out of the passenger seat of that sports car, taking the foot off the pedal, putting it on the brake, or he's not.
Or
And if he
along
isn't,
for the ride. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, then we
Yeah.
talk about why he isn't or why he can't. And then you can see that this conversation of hardwired by nature, evolving by choice, really starts to jiu-jitsu the brain. In other words, if I'm going to engage in this conversation by choice, I'm going to need to ask some proper questions of my beliefs, my actions. I'm going to need to engage in a way that possibly I wouldn't have before,
Hmm.
without knowing about this reproductive biological intelligence.
Right. So besides not doing harm, which is an important reason to do this work, what are the other benefits for men in getting reflective, in getting empowered around it, getting choiceful around, managing or living with this drive?
So one of the fascinating things I discovered in my dissertation, um, which was around our emotional sexual hardwiring, I interviewed 7 men from the men's work who had done a lot of consciousness work and a lot of sexuality work. Some of them were clients of mine. I interviewed them and harvested some of the emotions that come out of our pubescent state when we meet the urge. And some of them were secrecy, self-control, shame, and guilt were very high, but there was an overall vulnerability,
Hmm.
an overall vulnerability. Now, what I discovered was something I refer to, apologies for another new word, the watercolor effect. I'm sure somebody else has used that word somewhere else. But because the impact of the urge is so powerful on our individuation, on our actualization as men, the secrecy doesn't just stay within our sex narrative. We learn how to become secret about other things.
Mm.
The shame and guilt doesn't just stay located in our sexual ideation of ourselves. It bleeds into other aspects. So, how we show up in leadership, for example, how we show up in our relationship. And the phenomenal thing that happens is that once you unpick the lock of these things in your sexual narrative, it seems as if there's this watercolor effect into other aspects of the life that you live as a man. And part of the reason for that is, again, thanks to RBI, reproductive biological intelligence, sex has to be laser focused for us as men. It has to be laser focused. Not only does it create a blind spot for us, it creates a whole shadow over our consciousness. So when we start to shine a light and remove some of that shadow from our consciousness, life gets a lot lighter and it gets a lot brighter. Um, Again, because as you alluded to, we are now in the driver's seat. We become, we have greater what I call self-sexual agency. We have agency over ourselves, where a woman who has a craving for pineapple and eats the pineapple, or this was a true story, sweet potato. No, it must have been something she didn't have to cook. She ate it before she got to the checkout. um, that's the
Yeah.
extent of non-agency
Right.
that we have at variable times of our lives.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is I'm fascinated as well by self-mastery workshops that have us go into the workshop with our carrying all our baggage with us, and one of them is our sex baggage, but we put our sex baggage down at the door, and then we go into a 5-day workshop. We walk on fire and we scream or whatever it is that we do, and we speak, we share, and then we have to come out the workshop, pick up the bag, open it, and see, how does everything I've just done relate to my sexuality and my intimacy? And so the point of the book really is to shine again a laser focus on conversations that cannot be ignored in order for a brave, courageous man to step into full power,
Yeah.
full agency,
Yeah.
in a way where he's self-mastering with sex included, not without sex included.
Right. All
Yeah.
right. So another question is coming to mind. I have certainly had, I can just recently, even several male clients. I mean, I see couples, right? And the men talk about how sex is such a vulnerable experience for them, that
Yeah.
is the place where the walls come down and where they can be
Yeah.
vulnerable in ways that they are not anywhere else. Is that also hardwired? How does that relate, or does that relate to what we're talking about?
I don't think the I don't think the first of all, biology couldn't care how we feel. That's the first
Okay.
thing.
So, so
And I always say, couples who've completed the honeymoon phase and they're trying to figure out now, so now that the hormones have reduced and the projections have been retracted, like, how did I like this person? Why did I like this person in the first place? I
yeah,
say,
what am I
you know,
doing here?
what am I
Yeah.
doing here? I would say, like, well, biology couldn't care that you're confused. The
Yeah.
question is, is there respect and love for this person? How do we work? How do we work on it off a new platform? I would say the vulnerability comes about because if you think about giving a young boy a sports car with a brick on the pedal, um, who is feeling the urge to masturbate often and trying to figure out, and this goes for hetero and bisexual and gay men as well, trying to figure out what to do with these sexual thoughts that are flooding. Remember, I said the axons are being myelinated. There's more neurons. It's a very purposeful confusion. If we could imagine biology creating that, it's a purposeful confusion which lasts kind of ongoing. Now, take a boy out of childhood where he's just about come to terms with mommy and daddy and siblings, and the world kind of looks reasonably, hopefully, organized and secure and centered. And then, bang, you are no longer in your childhood place anymore. You're rapidly moved into this pubescent place where fantasy and and feeling awkward with either the opposite sex or with other boys if you're a man starts to pervade your life, and there's nobody to talk to about it. Actually, you're all alone about it. So it's part of the reason why my findings in the dissertation was that there is an overall vulnerability around sexuality, which has not been really written about very much or is spoken about very much at all. So yes, I would say, the penis is supposed to, the erect penis is supposed to be powerful and strong in that, but it creates a lot of um, psychic stress for a
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. The man
Uh,
behind the penis, right, might have shame or
the
guilt or insecurity or confusion or
Absolutely,
whatever it is. Yeah.
absolutely. And if you think about the biopsychosocial take on it, men are expected to perform.
I hate that word. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's society's, that's the romance industrial complex.
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, I think there's a long conversation to be had around the vulnerability of male sexuality. No doubt
Yeah.
about it.
Well,
Yeah,
do you want to? I mean, we got to wrap up. I know you've got so many different terms and concepts in your book. We could do a whole nother interview. But do you want to talk a little
sure.
bit about the romance industrial? Would you say industrial complex? Because you
Yeah,
brought
I
it
would
up a
have to.
couple of times. So why don't you expand on that as a
Okay,
parting
very
thought here?
briefly, very briefly. I mean, I'm also a songwriter, so I've taken notes of lyrics of songs. But I think um, a few things I'd say about the romance industrial complex. We are bombarded by memes from music to movies, to mention two platforms, which seem to suggest a euphoric, ongoing, sort of relentless love attraction between couples. We know that that is not realistic, it's not possible. And yet, in fact, similar to porn, for example, if people knew that porn was staged, it would save a lot of suffering in their personal lives
Right.
and in their relationships. Talk about performance. So the romance industrial complex is a setup. When I hear a song, for example, You're My Everything, the stars that make the sunshine, and when I keep hearing it, and I'm out of my honeymoon phase of relationship, I'm thinking, what the hell's wrong with me? This
Mm-hmm.
person's singing about that person's singing about it. The whole world is singing about this euphoric love. Why why was I feeling it? Why am I not feeling it? Now,
Yeah.
it leads to a lot of suffering,
Right.
a lot of suffering, and a lot of misjudgment of relationships. The love is gone. Really, I'll tell you what's probably gone. Your hormones are reduced, and you've probably realized this man's not your father, and that's good.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
it makes me think of like Disney movies too that reinforce these ideas, these
fairy tales.
societal expectations about what's
Yeah,
supposed to be, and then we're disappointed
yeah,
when it doesn't look like that.
yeah, yeah, and it's
Right.
it's terribly painful.
Yeah.
And in couples therapy spaces, I think it's more than a lifeline for a relationship, because many of us go about our days in a very automated way, and we keep hearing the same songs. I mean, I have these songs in my mind from the Beatles and from ELO, Electric Light Orchestra, and all of that. There are no songs except the breakup songs, which
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
that's
one
another
end it's
group.
one under
Yeah,
the other, right? It's either
yeah,
this incredible eternal love or we're breaking up.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 And I think people. The last thing I'll say is, I think people take a really serious, hard, fast view, consciously or unconsciously, on the lyrics that they're listening to, specifically because it's probably attached to a very catchy tune. That's
Mm-hmm.
another piece of brilliance of the romance industrial complex. It sells in the movie space. People like to be euphoric. People love to think about a wedding. Um, it's all beautifully dressed up. but it causes a lot of pain. And to
Yeah.
give people the option of realizing that, I think offers them another narrative in the therapy space where sort of phase 2 or 3 of the relationship can be gone into without exclaiming the love is gone.
Yeah. All right. I have one more question for you. Sorry. It makes me
Good.
think why I
Yeah.
assume you have hope. So, why do you have hope that two people who are so different, planetarily different, hormonally, biologically, emotionally, the love is gone, the honeymoon's over, all
Yeah.
these challenges, different priorities, that they can
Yeah.
make a relationship work together over a lifetime?
Well, taken at face value, I think if relationships were floated on the stock market, it would have been hetero. It would have been removed a long time ago. So, so you're right, because if we approach it from a point of view of being completely unaware of the setup of the relationship, the setup is nature's intelligence, and it's delicious, and it's scrumptious, and it's beautiful. But if you're unaware as a couple, and if both parties don't want to become aware, if you're unaware, you're not going to be able to continue to resuscitate the honeymoon phase. It has a shelf life. You you really are invited into a place of relationship mastery. You love the person, you have huge respect for what they do in the world, you love being housemates with the person, let's say, if you live together, and you want to come into this place of optimal sex and intimacy beyond the honeymoon phase. There's work to do.
Mm-hmm.
There's work to do. And my hope is that in the therapy spaces, therapists are not trying to drag people back into the honeymoon phase. Oh, you should try, go and do this experience with this color underwear on, and that kind of thing. That there's a new conversation that arises which engages the trickery, let's say. And there should be some humor around that as well. It's like, wow, we fell, right? We fell. But here we are. Here we
Right.
are. What are we going to do? And how are we going to make this brilliant? Often there are children involved, for God's
Mm-hmm.
sake.
Yeah.
Um, and there are other implications. But if we continue to pay attention to the romance industrial complex and keep going around in these painful cycles, a lot of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I believe it is possible. It is possible. It requires a different narrative.
Yeah. All right. So, where can people reach you? And if you wouldn't mind saying the title of the book again and where people can find that.
The title of the book is Sexed, Sexed, Hardwired by Nature, Evolving by Choice. It is a new vision for men and sex, intimacy, biology, connection, and selfhood. It's a book for men and a book for the women who love them. And you can reach me at my email, abrap@iafrica.com, abrap@iafrica.com. There's also on the book's website, sext.global, there is an opportunity to reach me, and I would welcome that.
Great. I'll make sure those links are in the show notes. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Jessa. It's been a pleasure.